It's the 15th of May, 2020. This is the RheumNow podcast. Hi, I'm Dr. Jack Cush with RheumNow.com. So, how you doing? It's kind of difficult out there, isn't it? This is seemingly like a bad party or a never-ending visit to your in-laws, this COVID thing. But, you know, we're going to get by. We're going to persevere, and you have to. People are looking to you to lead because you're the ones who know. I'm staying interested by just watching the news. I mean, I'm not talking about the television. That's kind of a beat down. You know, you can't stay positive when you see all that negativity. When I say the news, I'm talking about the medical news and the journal reports about the coronavirus and what's changing and how our drugs are still in the news and still hogging the limelight. We're going to cover a number of these items today on the podcast. I don't know when this is going to end. You know, this focus on the coronavirus. As long as it's interesting, I'm going to keep reporting it. If you're tired of it, let me know. I'm going to try to mix in, you know, the good news in rheumatology with a lot of the news in COVID, and keep it interesting in the weeks to come. So I'll first point you to the website, RheumNow.com, and a bunch of interesting videos we put up this week. One, maybe my first, is God bless the nurses. And, you know, it is Nurses Week, and I've been thinking about this and what I can do more than write a card and give some flowers to our nurses. But this was my sort of video testimonial as to what I think about nurses. And yes, I put everything in there that I do truly think. I want you to look at it and share it with your nurses and tell them what you think about nurses. There's a great video by Barry Gruber from Long Island. Barry talked about why you can't stop denosumab and why there's a significant rebound with increased fracture rates if you try to space that out during this COVID era. Not a good idea. This past Tuesday, Joan Merrill gave a great grand rounds on Tuesday Night Rheumatology as to what COVID-19 has to do with lupus. Spoiler alert, it actually has quite a bit due to lupus, even though she said nothing at the start of her lecture. She talks a lot about the vascular disease that's now becoming part of the COVID damage syndrome, and how that fits into what we know about lupus and catastrophic lupus and complementopathies. Interesting video, a lot of good questions. And then lastly is a really good video from what I call the practice guys, Dr. Danny Ricciardi in Brooklyn, Dr. Herb Baraf in DC, Maryland area. I just sat them down, asked them a bunch of questions about life, practice, challenges, the future, a funny discussion, and actually interesting answers. It looks like nobody's going back to normal anytime soon, and most people think they're going to continue doing this telemedicine thing for quite some time and long into the future. Maybe the highlight of this week are the new ACR guidelines on gout management. Now, do we really need them? I think we always need guidelines out there that we can wave at people and say, here, read this. You'll learn something about managing gout. And it's a fairly long document. I think there was like 47 or 50 PICO questions and a total of 42 guidelines. I tried to make it short and I didn't. It's really kind of long. So I'll thank Dr. Mike Putman at Northwestern at EB Rheum, Evidence-Based Rheumatology. If you don't listen to his podcast, you should. He sort of distilled it on Twitter by saying a few things that he liked. One, don't treat asymptomatic hyperuricemia. Two, it's okay to start urate lowering therapy during a flare. Three, yes, everyone should still treat the target with an SUA of less than 6. And that lastly, allopurinol should be your first line therapy. A few other notes that are in there is that they do suggest that we limit our patients and their alcohol intake, their intake of purines, which I found surprising, the intake of high fructose corn syrup and its derivatives, but didn't support the use of vitamin C in gout management. It's worth a read and it's worth being aware of that. There's an interesting report that looks at what are the associations with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, or NASH, or basically severe liver disease. A meta-analysis of many patients shows that type 2 diabetes was associated with a greater than twofold risk hazard ratio of 2.25, and that obesity associated with a 20% increased risk of severe liver disease. And this is not just in our patients, this is across the board. Other risk factors are low HDL, high triglycerides, hypertension, were all independent variables in predicting those who will develop NAFLD, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. A Hungarian cohort of I think it was like 9,000 patients looked at incident lupus and treated lupus patients and looked at their mortality rates and showed that, yes, both groups have an increased standardized mortality ratio of an SMR of 1.63 or 2.09 respectively. But when they looked at the deaths in the lupus populations were just like the deaths in a lot of other populations. However, in their cohort, it was infection that was much higher in the lupus population compared to others. And that's an important note, that infection in lupus could be a really severe, if not final, endpoint. A financial analysis of what's happening during the COVID era shows that overall hospitalizations are down over 50%, 55% on average. Last week we talked about that hospitals are going to lose $50 billion a month beginning in March, April, May, June. They don't know what's going to happen after July 1. So that's $200 billion in the first 4 months of COVID. And again, this is clearly shown up by hospitalization rates are way down, especially for things like ophthalmology and ENT, 91 and 72%. Even rheumatology is down 2/3 by 66%. So again, everything's being affected. I think we're going to look forward in the future to other analyses that are going to tell us what's the financial impact of this COVID era on practice and practice incomes. I know that institutions like mine, the medical schools, are sorely hurting, but boy, that's not nearly as much as what's happening to you guys that are in private practice, where many people are getting by. They're not making the income that they were, even by working hard at doing telemedicine, televideo, telephone visits. That, overall incomes have got to be down at least 30% or more. So we'll be looking at that and try to get some numbers for you in the future. I know you might have heard of this, but I think it's good to put it on record. There is this thing out there called COVID toes. And, it looks like chilblains. It looks like bad libido. It looks like vasculitis, modeled ecchymotic or erythematous toes, a little asymmetric in their distribution. It's not like all toes and whatnot. It's a few toes here and there. It looks like an ischemic and/or vasculitic stage. Toes, heels, and soles appear to be affected. When they do happen, they can resolve as the infection resolves, taking up to 3 weeks to do so. So look for COVID toes, and it kind of goes along with what Joan Merrill was talking about in her talk about thrombotic microangiopathy being one of the downstream damage events that seems to be happening in COVID that could be complement mediated. Obviously, there's a lot of vascular effects that can affect organs, including brain, kidney, skin, which is what we're seeing here at COVID toes. JAMA Lancet, no, sorry, not JAMA Lancet, there's no such journal, I just made that up. Lancet Rheumatology republished at the end of last week on an anakinra study. There are a number of IL-1 studies in progress with anakinra and with canakinumab in treating the COVID-positive patients. I think we'd like to see trials looking at those drugs in patients with a cytokine storm syndrome, because we don't believe that IL-6 is the only option there. But this particular study looked at 29 patients treated with high-dose anakinra, that's 200 milligrams given once a day, and they compared that to a control group, a semi-control group of 17 patients not on anakinra. These patients had ARDS, lung involvement, but they were not in the ICU. They had to have high CRPs and high ferritins to get in the study. The endpoint was what were they doing at day 21. There was greater survival with the anakinra-treated patients, 90% versus 56% in the non-anakinra or control group. And the anakinra-treated patients had more resolution of CRP and respiratory function than controls, 72 versus 50%. Two more reports. Plaquenil does not protect lupus patients from COVID-19. This was an Annals of Rheumatic Disease article that was a published, I guess, early report from the Global Rheumatology Alliance that's looking at, all of your patients who developed COVID-19 being entered into this registry. They talk about the first 80 lupus patients with the coronavirus. These 80 lupus patients were largely young women or women under 65. It's about 80% of the population were women, 80% were under 65. I think 2/3 of them were on antimalarials, and they were taking routine doses of hydroxychloroquine. When they looked at patients who were treated with hydroxychloroquine versus those that were not, there was no protection from what happened with COVID, meaning hospitalization, severe outcomes, etc., were not any different. So being on hydroxychloroquine, at least in this unselected sort of registry-generated data set, looks like it's not necessarily protective, and that kind of falls in line with many of the trials that we've seen recently where either hydroxychloroquine, especially in high doses, had no effect or may even be associated with more cardiac effects and even more deaths. And lastly, maybe the big report of the week. Well, I didn't put in this point out here. Oh yeah, here's a big report. I led the week with this report about why men are more severely affected with COVID. And are they? Now, I don't know about you, men and women are affected here, but there are more men, and probably of those who go into the ICU and or who die or require mechanical ventilation, it looks like men are outnumbering women by a significant margin. And really there's no good reason. I was thinking that, why is it that middle-aged men, 50 and 60, who have no risk factors are the ones who get severe COVID, get intubated and die, either right away, not usually right away, actually usually after 2, 3, 4 weeks. Elderly people who get this tend to die earlier, and I think it's because they have comorbidities that will take them to death more quickly. But why is it that these middle-aged men are in the ICU on the respirator? And I think that an interesting report showed up this week where it was a large study of heart failure patients, a biobank study of 1,485 men, 537 women, and they looked at circulating ACE2 levels as a predictor or a variable in heart failure outcomes. Well, since they had the stuff biobanked, they looked at a number of different things. And they found that ACE2 levels are actually much higher in men with the cohort that they looked at. And then ACE2 levels were unrelated to being on either an ARB or an ACE inhibitor. ACE2 is found on lungs, heart, kidneys, and blood vessels and testes. It is the receptor that the coronavirus binds to, and maybe having more of these receptors might actually lend to more severe infection. That's a latter part is a hypothesis. And then maybe the other big report of the week came out just yesterday. The CDC issued a warning or an alert about the Pediatric Multi-System Inflammatory Syndrome, or PMIS. It's a new thing. You've been hearing about it a lot in the news, and there are hundreds of reports, over 100 in New York City alone. These have cropped up in England and Greece and Italy. There have been reports, and basically we're told, gee, it looks like either toxic shock or something like Kawasaki's, but not Kawasaki's, and a lot of vagueness and scaring the heck out of moms and parents who are worried about their kids getting this. Previously we said that kids, they are less likely to get the coronavirus infection. If they do, they have less severe manifestations. And then boom, starting 2-3 weeks ago, we get all these reports now of these kids not doing well, many of them in the ICU, a few of them dying, and it's a little scary. There was a New York City Health Department report of 15 cases. Those cases actually all had fever, half had rash, abdominal pain, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea. Only 10 of the 15 actually had evidence, and the kids were ages 2 to 15. The Lancet last week, or actually this week, came up with 10 cases with Kawasaki-like disease that have been collected in Italy after the 18th of February and up till April 20th. And they compare those to their historic cases, and they basically show that these kids had more of a risk of macrophage activation syndrome, or shock or cardiac manifestations than do usual Kawasaki's disease. As you know, Kawasaki's disease is an acute febrile illness of children. It's an acute syndrome with fever, the strawberry tongue, mucosal lesions, desquamative or erythematous lesions on the trunks, palms, and soles, conjunctivitis, cervical adenopathy. They have inflammatory markers, and cardiac abnormalities, including the aneurysms. Well, in these kids, they don't. Half of the London group, the Lancet report actually met criteria for the Kawasaki syndrome. The others did not. Many of them had conjunctivitis. Half of them had cardiac manifestations. Let's see, they had 6 with diarrhea, 5 with CNS, 4 with pneumonia on chest X-ray. Echoes were abnormal. In 6 of 10, only 1 had aneurysms. SED rates were high in 7 out of the 8 that were measured, usually 50 to over 100. They were all treated with IVIG, either with aspirin or with methylprednisolone. And they have, evidence of troponin and D-dimers and whatnot. Again, this seems to differ from a COVID in adults in that the presentations are different. They're less likely to be pulmonary. They're more likely to have conjunctivitis and GI presentations. And then the other thing that seems, it's not well spelled out, but it looks like they get this syndrome, this Kawasaki-like syndrome, PMIS, Pediatric Multisystem Inflammatory Syndrome. They get it weeks after the onset of symptoms or after exposure to the bug. Again, the criteria by the CDC are age less than 21 with evidence of inflammation and multi-system illness, as I just described. They can get more than 2 or more organs involved, including cardiac, renal, respiratory, hematologic, GI, derm, and CNS. There's no alternative diagnosis, so these patients have to be worked up for other causes. It could also be Kawasaki's. And they need to have a positive or current test for the SARS-CoV-2 infection, either by PCR, serology, or antigen test. Again, the CDC wants these cases to be identified, and if you find them, you should report them to your state society, local officials, so these can get into the literature and we can get a better understanding of this particular disorder. So that's it for this week on the podcast. Next week's going to be a big week on RheumNow. Our Tuesday night rheumatology guests are going to be Philip Robinson from Queensland. Philip is one of the instigators behind the Global Rheumatology Alliance and the COVID Rheum Registry. He's going to talk about that. And then Peter Nash, also from Down Under, is going to talk about COVID in Oz. That means Australia to those of us who don't know about Oz. We might call Peter and Philip next week the Wizards of Oz. Tune in next week. Take care of yourselves. Take care of your family. Bye.